Schnee. Silence shattered the courtroom as the billionaire sneered, pointing a manicured finger at the quiet woman in the faded gray cardigan. "She is a useless, delusional nobody," he scoffed. He thought he had already won. He had no idea the woman he'd just humiliated was about to dismantle his entire empire. The air inside courtroom 302 of the Manhattan Civil Courthouse was thick and stagnant, smelling faintly of lemon polish and decades of anxious sweat. It was a Tuesday morning, and the gallery was packed to the brim. On one side sat a row of impeccably dressed corporate executives, their tailored suits armor against the mundane struggles of the working class. On the other side sat a mismatched collection of neighborhood locals, holding on to frayed hopes and hand-painted signs that had been confiscated at the door. At the center of this brewing storm stood Daniel Harrington. Daniel was the CEO of Harrington Global Enterprises, a real estate conglomerate that devoured historic neighborhoods and spat out glass and steel monstrosities. He was a man who measured his worth in hostile takeovers and offshore accounts. Today he wore a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming subtly from beneath his French cuff. He exuded an aura of untouchable arrogance, leaning back in the plaintiff's chair with the relaxed posture of a man watching a game he had already rigged. Beside him sat his lead counsel, Gregory Finch, a shark of a litigator from one of New York's top 5 firms. Finch was currently sorting through a pristine stack of leather-bound dossiers, completely unbothered by the proceedings. Why should he be? This was supposed to be a slam dunk. Their target was the Oakwood Community Haven, a century-old building sitting on 3 acres of prime Manhattan real estate. Harrington had acquired the surrounding block and needed the Haven gone to break ground on his crown jewel, a 50-story luxury residential tower. The only thing standing in his way was a stubborn, pro se defendant named Beatrice Smith. Beatrice, or Bea, as the community called her, sat alone at the defense table. She looked entirely out of place in the grand, oak-paneled room. She wore a faded gray cardigan over a simple white blouse, her hair pulled back into a messy utilitarian bun, held together by a single plastic clip. A pair of oversized, wire-rimmed glasses slipped down the bridge of her nose. In front of her was not a sleek laptop or a team of paralegals, but a chaotic mountain of dog-eared manila folders, crumpled post-it notes, and grocery store receipts. Judge Patricia Davies, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, peered over her reading glasses. "Mr. Finch, you may call your first witness." "Thank you, Your Honor. We call Daniel Harrington to the stand," Finch announced, his voice smooth and commanding. Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced elegance. He walked to the witness box, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As he sat down, he cast a fleeting, disdainful glance at Bea. She was currently rummaging through her tote bag, seemingly looking for a lost pen. Finch began his direct examination, painting Daniel as a visionary philanthropist. He spoke of progress, of urban revitalization, and of the generous though legally forced buyout offers Harrington Global had extended to the community center. "Mr. Harrington," Finch prompted, pacing slowly before the jury box, "could you explain to the court why the Oakwood Haven's refusal to vacate is not only a breach of standard urban development protocols, but also a detriment to the city?" Daniel leaned into the microphone. "Gladly, Gregory. The Haven is a dilapidated eyesore. We are offering to bring thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue to this district. We offered Miss Smith a settlement of $2 million to relocate her little charity project, a more than generous sum. Yet she sits here wasting the court's time, playing at being a lawyer when she clearly doesn't even know how to organize her own paperwork." "Objection," Bea mumbled, half-standing. "He's just being mean." Judge Davies sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Sustained." Mr. Perry. Harrington, please confine your remarks to the facts of the case, not personal attacks on the defendant. Daniel smirked. Apologies, Your Honor. The fact is, Harrington Global has the legal deed to the surrounding lots, and the Haven's outdated foundational easement violates the city's new zoning laws, which, I might add, my legal team helped draft. We are within our rights to commence demolition. For the next hour, Daniel and his lawyer dominated the room. They presented glossy architectural renderings, complex zoning charts, and financial projections. They built an impenetrable wall of corporate jargon that left the jury looking dazed and the community members in the gallery sinking lower into their seats. Bay just sat there occasionally scribbling something down with a half-chewed yellow pencil. When Finch finally concluded, he shot Bea a condescending smile. Your witness, Miss Smith. Assuming you know how this works. Bea stood up. She accidentally knocked a stack of papers onto the floor. A smattering of laughter erupted from the corporate side of the gallery. Daniel rolled his eyes dramatically, leaning heavily on the wooden rail of the witness stand. Take your time, Miss Smith, Judge Davies said, a hint of pity in her voice. Bea scrambled to pick up the papers, her face flushed red. She walked toward the center of the room, clutching a single crumpled sheet of paper. She looked incredibly small standing before the elevated witness box. Mr. Harrington, Bea started, her voice shaking slightly. You said you offered us $2 million, but isn't it true that the land underneath the haven is independently appraised at nearly $40 million? Daniel let out a harsh, barking laugh. He didn't even look at his lawyer. Miss Smith, land is only worth what a developer can build on it. Without my surrounding parcels, your dirt is worthless. I offered you a charity handout because I felt sorry for you. But the deed, Bea started, looking down at her paper. The deed is a relic, Daniel interrupted, his temper flaring. He was tired of this charade. He had a flight to Geneva at 4 o'clock, and this mousy woman was delaying him. Listen to me and listen carefully. You are completely out of your depth. You don't understand business. You don't understand law. You are a useless, delusional nobody playing dress-up in a real courtroom. You think your little bake sales and community prayers are going to stop a multi-billion-dollar enterprise? You're pathetic. The courtroom went dead silent. The insult echoed off the high ceilings. Even Finch winced slightly. It was a bad look for the jury. Mr. Harrington. Judge Davies barked, slamming her gavel down. One more outburst like that and I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand me? Daniel waved a dismissive hand. Understood, Your Honor. I apologize. My passion for this city's progress sometimes gets the better of me. In the gallery, the community members looked devastated. The sheer power and cruelty of Daniel Harrington had seemingly crushed the last bit of air out of their defense. Bea stood frozen in the center of the room. Her head was bowed. To everyone watching, it looked as though she was holding back tears. It looked as though she had been utterly defeated. Then Bea Smith slowly raised her head. The flush of embarrassment had vanished from her cheeks. The nervous tremble in her hands was gone. She reached up and pulled the oversized, wire-rimmed glasses off her face, folding them with deliberate, mechanical precision. She slipped them into the pocket of her cardigan. When she looked back up at Daniel Harrington, her eyes were cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. Let's move on, shall we? Bea's voice rang out. It was no longer the soft, trembling tone of a defeated community organizer. It was crisp, authoritative, and carried a resonant timbre that demanded absolute attention. The sudden shift in her demeanor was so jarring that Judge Davies actually leaned forward in her chair, her eyebrows knitting together. Daniel blinked, temporarily thrown off balance. Excuse me? I asked to move on, Mr. Harrington. Since you are so pressed for time, let us delve into the actual mechanics of your multi-billion-dollar enterprise, Bayer said, walking back to her defense table. She didn't fumble this time. She ignored the messy pile of manila folders entirely. Instead, she reached into her battered tote bag and pulled out a sleek black leather folio that no one had noticed before. She unzipped it, revealing perfectly organized color-coded documents. Mr. Harrington, you stated under oath that Harrington Global has the legal right to commence demolition based on zoning laws your team helped draft. Is that correct? Yes, Daniel replied cautiously, his eyes narrowing at the black folio. And Harrington Global is the sole financier of this luxury high-rise project. Finch stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance: the financing of the project has no bearing on the property dispute. Goes directly to the plaintiff's standing and right to claim damages, Your Honor, Bayer countered instantly, not even looking at the judge. If Harrington Global is not the primary stakeholder, they cannot file a motion for forced eviction under Section 4B of the Municipal Code. Judge Davies looked at Bayer with newfound respect. Overruled. You may answer the question, Mr. Fall. Harrington. Daniel adjusted his tie. Harrington Global manages the project. The capital is diversified. It's standard corporate practice. Diversified, Bayer repeated, tasting the word. She pulled a crisp white document from her folio and approached the clerk to hand it up to the judge, then handed a copy to a very confused Gregory Finch. Let the record reflect I am entering Defense Exhibit A into evidence. Mr. Harrington, isn't it true that Harrington Global is completely insolvent without the backing of a private equity firm known as Vanguard Holdings? Daniel's face drained of color. The silence in the room was absolute. Objection. Finch shouted, his voice cracking. This is highly confidential financial information. It is protected by NDA and sealed corporate privilege. Information obtained legally through the public discovery phase of a subsidiary bankruptcy filing in Delaware 3 months ago, Bayer replied coolly. Public record, Mr. Finch. You really should read the footnotes of your own filings. Judge Davies scanned the document, her eyes widening slightly. The document appears admissible. Proceed, Miss Smith. I'll ask again, Bayer said, stepping closer to the witness box. The aura of the useless nobody was entirely dead. In her place stood a predator who had finally cornered her prey. Without the capital injection of $400 million from Vanguard Holdings, Harrington Global would have defaulted on its city loans last year. Yes or no, Daniel? The casual use of his first name felt like a slap to the face. Daniel gripped the wooden rail of the witness box, his knuckles turning white. Yes, he forced out through gritted teeth. Thank you. Now Vanguard Holdings is a shell corporation, is it not? It is entirely managed by a blind trust registered in the Cayman Islands. A trust known as the Obsidian Group. Daniel looked frantically at Finch. Finch was furiously flipping through his own pristine binders, suddenly sweating profusely. Your Honor, we need a recess, Finch stammered. This line of questioning is an ambush. You had months to prepare for this trial, Counselor, Judge Davies replied dryly. If the pro se defendant can navigate your corporate structure, so can you. Denied. Answer the question, Mr. Harrington. I am not privy to the ownership structure of Vanguard Holdings, Daniel lied. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Only 3 people in the world knew about the Obsidian Group's connection to his company. How did this woman in a threadbare cardigan know? You are under oath, Daniel, Bayer reminded him softly. She pulled out a second document, Defense Exhibit B. A single father, but would unravel hisn't van, that would unravel hisn't etched in global, dated October 14th of last year. Signed by you as the recipient. You are well aware of who holds your leash. Daniel swallowed hard. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by a suffocating sense of dread. "Yes, I know of the Obsidian Group." "Excellent. We're making progress," Bea smiled, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Now, Mr. Harrington, let's talk about the specific stipulations attached to that $400 million lifeline, specifically the moral turpitude and community preservation clauses embedded in your funding agreement." Finch shot out of his chair, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It hit the floor with a loud crack. "Your Honor, this is an outrage. The funding agreement between my client and a private trust has absolutely zero bearing on the property lines of a community center." "It has everything to do with it, Your Honor," Bea fired back, her voice echoing with commanding authority. "Mr. Harrington has testified that he has the absolute authority to demolish the Oakwood Haven. I am establishing that he does not have that authority. In fact, his primary investors explicitly forbade him from aggressive, hostile takeovers of historically designated community spaces, a clause he intentionally hid from his investors by falsifying the address and zoning history of the Haven in his quarterly reports." Gasps erupted from the corporate side of the gallery. Fraud. She was openly accusing a titan of industry of defrauding his billionaire backers on public record. "That is a lie," Daniel roared, standing up in the witness box, his face purple with rage. "You have no proof of that. The Obsidian Group is a faceless entity, a ghost. They don't care about a rotting community center. They care about returns. You know nothing about how the real world works, you stupid. I know exactly how it works." Barr's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the billionaire instantly. She walked right up to the wooden partition separating them. The height difference was vast. But in that moment, Daniel Harrington looked like a small, frightened child shrinking away from a giant. "You think the Obsidian Group is a ghost," Bea said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You think you can take their money, ignore their ethical mandates, falsify documents to hide your dirty work, and then waltz into a courtroom to bully the people you're trying to crush." She turned away from him and walked back to her table. She picked up a final document from the black folio. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a wire transfer. It was heavy, cream-colored parchment with an embossed gold seal. "Defense Exhibit C, Your Honor," Bea said, handing it to the bailiff. "What is this, Miss Smith?" Judge Davies asked, inspecting the heavy paper. "That, Your Honor, is the master charter of the Obsidian Group, including the unredacted declaration of the primary trustee and sole owner of the trust." Finch was visibly shaking now. He whispered frantically to a paralegal who sprinted out of the courtroom doors to make a phone call. Daniel stared at Bea, his mind racing, trying to put the pieces together. The color-coded files, the precise legal maneuvering, the absolute lack of fear. Beatrice Smith. The name was so common, so entirely unremarkable. "Mr. Path." "Harrington," Bea said, turning back to him, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes locked onto his. "You called me a useless, delusional nobody. You said I don't understand business, but there is one thing you failed to realize when you decided to defraud the people funding your entire life." She took a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of her secret finally lifting off her shoulders. "The ghost has a name." Judge Patricia Davies had presided over civil disputes in Manhattan for 3 decades. She had seen Fortune 500 CEOs lie through their teeth, and she had watched politicians crumble on the stand. But as her eyes scanned the heavy, cream-colored parchment of Defense Exhibit C, her hands actually developed a faint, perceptible tremor. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the frantic, whispered arguing between Gregory Finch and his junior associates at the plaintiff's table. Judge Davies slowly lowered the document. She looked at the woman in the faded cardigan, then at the billionaire sweating in the witness box. "Miss Smith," the judge began, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, replaced by a tone of profound incredulity. "This document, it bears the authenticated watermark of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. It lists the sole executor and primary trustee of the Obsidian Group as Beatrice Ellen Smith." "That is correct, Your Honor," Bayer replied, her voice calm and even. "This is a fabrication." Finch suddenly exploded, surging to his feet. He pointed a trembling finger at Bayer. "Your Honor, this is perjury of the highest order. A pro se defendant, a woman who runs a soup kitchen, cannot possibly be the shadow financier behind a $400 million private equity trust. This is a desperate forged piece of theater meant to derail these proceedings." Bayer didn't even look at Finch. She kept her eyes locked on Daniel Harrington, whose face had gone the color of wet ash. If Mr. Finch would bother to check his email, or perhaps call his firm's banking liaison at Chase Manhattan, he would find that the authentication codes on that charter matched the exact routing authorizations that saved his client from bankruptcy last October, Bayer stated. A paralegal behind Finch, a young man named Arthur, had his phone hidden beneath the table. His face suddenly drained of color. He tugged violently on Finch's suit jacket, whispering frantically into the older lawyer's ear. Finch swatted the young man away, but Arthur persisted, finally shoving the illuminated phone screen directly into Finch's line of sight. Finch stopped speaking entirely. His jaw went slack. "Daniel," Bayer said, taking a slow step toward the witness box. The entire gallery leaned forward, collectively holding their breath. "You asked why I was wasting the court's time. You called me a delusional nobody. You see, when my late husband and I founded Vanguard Holdings 20 years ago, we made a promise. We built our wealth on ethical development. When he passed, I stepped away from the public eye. I placed our assets into the Obsidian Blind Trust to fund philanthropic endeavors across the globe." Daniel swallowed, his throat making a loud, audible cooking sound. You're her, the Vanguard widow." "I prefer Beatrice," she corrected sharply. "A few years ago, I began hearing troubling rumors about a rising developer in New York, a man named Daniel Harrington. Rumors said he was preying on historical low-income neighborhoods, that he was using predatory zoning tactics, intimidating elderly residents, and falsifying environmental reports to force cheap buyouts." "Those are allegations," Daniel stammered, gripping the wooden rail so hard his fingers looked bruised. "Business is aggressive, Miss Smith. You know that. If you really are the Obsidian trustee, then you know I doubled the trust's initial projection." "I made you money. I don't care about the money, Daniel," Bea said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register that commanded the entire room. "I care about the community. When Harrington Global submitted a request for a $400 million lifeline from my trust, I saw an opportunity. I approved the loan, but with strict ironclad clauses regarding ethical community preservation. Clauses you signed. Clauses you immediately violated the moment the ink was dry." "I didn't violate anything," Daniel shouted, panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. The Oakwood Haven was an unzoned disaster. It was structurally unsound. "I was doing this city a favor." Bae pulled one final thin folder from her black folio. "Your Honor, I present Defense Exhibit D. This is the structural engineering report commissioned by Harrington Global 6 months ago. The undoctored version. It clearly states the haven is structurally flawless." She handed it to the bailiff. "Mr. Harrington buried this report and submitted a falsified version to the city planners to secure his demolition permit. He then submitted those same falsified documents to the Obsidian Group to bypass his funding restrictions." The gallery erupted. A woman in the second row, Sarah Jenkins, who had volunteered at the Haven for 15 years, let out a loud gasp, tears springing to her eyes. Judge Davies slammed her gavel down, her face flushed with righteous anger. "Order. I will have order in this court." Once the room settled, she glared at the witness box. "Mr. Harrington, did you intentionally submit fraudulent engineering reports to this court and to your investors?" "No. No, she's manipulating the data." Daniel looked wildly at his lawyer. "Gregory, do something. Object." But Gregory Finch was no longer standing beside his client. He was slowly, deliberately backing away from the plaintiff's table, furiously stuffing his pristine leather-bound dossiers into his briefcase. "Mr. Finch?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your Honor," Finch said, his voice slick with self-preservation. "In light of this newly introduced evidence, and specifically the implications of active corporate fraud regarding Defense Exhibit D, the firm of Finch, Sterling, and Cross cannot in good conscience continue to represent the plaintiff. We were entirely unaware of these falsified documents. I formally request the court's permission to immediately withdraw as counsel for Daniel Harrington and Harrington Global." Daniel looked as though he had been physically struck. "Gregory, you're abandoning me? I pay you $3,000 an hour. You pay me to argue the law, Daniel," Finch hissed, snapping his briefcase shut. "Not to go to federal prison for aiding and abetting wire fraud. You're on your own." The abandonment by his own lead counsel was the final blow. The imposing, untouchable titan of industry, who had swaggered into the courtroom an hour ago, was gone. In his place was a terrified, cornered man, sweating through his bespoke Tom Ford suit, staring at a woman in a cheap gray cardigan who had just systematically dismantled his entire life. "Your Honor," Bayer said, turning away from the pathetic display. She walked back to her table, her posture radiating an effortless, terrifying authority. "As the sole trustee of the Obsidian Group and the primary secured creditor of Harrington Global, I am officially exercising the breach of contract clause outlined in Section 8 of our funding agreement." "And what does that entail, Miss Smith?" Judge Davies asked, leaning forward, completely captivated by the legal execution taking place in her courtroom. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, my attorneys in Delaware filed a notice of immediate default," Bay explained, checking her plain digital wristwatch. "Because Mr. Harrington committed active fraud to secure our capital. The $400 million loan has been recalled in full, effective immediately. Because Harrington Global does not possess the liquidity to repay this debt, the Obsidian Group is seizing all collateral." Daniel let out a choked, desperate noise. "All collateral?" "Yes, Daniel," Bay said, finally allowing a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Including all of your corporate assets, your subsidiary holdings, and the deeds to the 3 acres of land surrounding the Oakwood Haven. Harrington Global is, as of this exact moment, completely insolvent." "You can't do this," Daniel screamed, lunging forward over the witness stand, spit flying from his lips. "I built that company. I own this city. You can't just take it from me." "Bailiff, restrain him," Judge Davies ordered. 2 armed court officers moved swiftly, placing themselves between the witness box and Bayer. Daniel shrank back, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit, a loophole, a friend. He found nothing but cold, judging stares. "You called me a useless nobody," Bayer said quietly, walking right up to the officers, looking past them to Daniel. "You thought because I didn't wear a $1,000 suit, because I didn't scream and demand respect, that I was weak. You thought the people of this neighborhood were just dirt to be paved over. But power isn't about how loud you yell, Daniel. It's about knowing when to speak." She turned to the bench. "Your Honor, the defense formally moves for a dismissal of this eviction suit with prejudice. Furthermore, I will be submitting copies of all exhibits, including the proof of Mr. Harrington's doctored engineering reports, to the New York District Attorney's Office for criminal review." Judge Davies didn't hesitate. She looked at Daniel Harrington with sheer disgust. "Motion granted," the judge's voice boomed through the silent room. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Harrington, you are ordered to immediately cease all hostile actions against the Oakwood Haven. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today, I am issuing a bench warrant for your arrest on suspicion of perjury, forgery, and grand larceny. Officers, take him into custody." "No!" "Wait, let me call my board," Daniel begged, raising his hands as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply in the room. "You don't understand. I'm Daniel Harrington." "Not anymore," Bea whispered to herself. As the billionaire was roughly escorted out of the courtroom's side doors, stripped of his dignity, his wealth, and his freedom, a stunned silence lingered for only a fraction of a second. Then the gallery exploded. The community members leaped to their feet. Sarah Jenkins was sobbing openly, hugging the man next to her. Cheers and applause bounced off the high, oak-paneled ceilings. The years they had been pushed around, bullied, and bought out by men in expensive suits. Today, one of their own had fought back. Judge Davies didn't even bother using her gavel to quiet the room. She simply sat back, a rare, genuine smile crossing her face, and watched the celebration. Bea stood at the defense table. She slowly zipped up her sleek black folio and placed it back into a battered tote bag. She reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out her oversized, wire-rimmed glasses, and slid them back down the bridge of her nose. The sharp, predatory gaze softened, instantly transforming her back into the quiet, unassuming community organizer everyone knew and loved. She turned to face the gallery. The cheering grew louder. Bea offered them a warm, slightly bashful smile, giving a small wave. She wasn't a nobody. She was the shield that protected them, and heaven help the next billionaire who tried to call her useless. Did Beatrice's brilliant undercover trap leave you completely speechless? Sometimes the quietest people in the room hold the most power. If you loved seeing this arrogant billionaire finally get what he deserved, hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life courtroom dramas. Ring the bell so you never miss an update.